Good afternoon. You remember I'm Mr. Grobler. I'm glad to be back with you again. And you just have tonight left to study, and then tomorrow, the whole day. And that will determine your success for paper 1. I hope you've also had a look already at a bit of paper 2 work. And then, of course, over the weekend, you'll prepare yourself very well for paper 2. So life sciences, I want to tell you, because I've been involved with life sciences many years, gives you the chance to do well. For your entry levels at university, life sciences is the subject where you can get a good score. It can help you to raise your score for going to university. So what I like about life sciences, it is fair. If you study hard, you will be rewarded with good results. For those that don't study, I've seen many learners scoring 20% and 15% and so on. So remember, life sciences is fair. Study and you can do well on Friday. There are certain aspects of the work that always appear in the paper, and there are certain aspects that if you concentrate and you're well trained, like I will train you today, you can do well and you can score marks with it. I'm talking about case studies. You know what case studies are? I'm going to show you here, if you look on the screen now. You see, here's an example of a case study that we had in June 2014. You remember this from June. It was the paper you wrote in paper 1. Look what we have there. We have a graph, and then we also have a little paragraph there, like a small comprehension test. Now, here you should really score marks, but I want to highlight a few skills that will enable you to get the maximum marks out of this type of question. You will find it probably in paper 1 on Friday, a type of case study. I've not seen the paper, but I can tell you they like to ask case studies. They like to use paragraphs, but they also like to use graphs, as you can see here. And let's look at the graph. Let's start off by getting a graph. Now, to interpret a graph is a very important scientific skill. So they like to test that in both paper 1 and paper 2, just like also giving a paragraph. So what is the most important thing when you get a graph? The first thing that you have to realize is that a graph is like a picture, and a picture speaks 1,000 words. So it's basically a story being told. In every graph you see, you just need to look first of all at the heading. What is this all about? So let's analyze this graph and see how you will go about it. First of all, you look at the heading. What is this all about? The change in population size over a period of 45 months. So you think about it, there's a population that's getting bigger or smaller over quite a long period of time. How long is 45 months? You can think how many years those are. And then you say to yourself, what is going on here? We've got on the x-axis, we've got time going by. So we're starting, and then the time is going by in months. And then we've got the population. Look here, remember it's 1,000, because always look at the unit. Always look at the unit there in brackets. In this case, it says thousands. So if they ask you how many are at a certain time period, like how many of the pest were after 20 months, then you will say it's 1,500, because you remember we're working with 1, 2, 3, 4. There you've got the thousands. So what populations are indicated here? Then you look carefully at the graph. You see 2 lines. And you see there's a pest population. If it's above this dotted line, it causes trouble. And then there's a biological control agent. That's another species that's living in the same area with the pest. And look here, over time, this dotted line goes up. So anything in any graph, it's so easy. If it goes up, it's obviously getting more. And then it's got a high point or a peak there. And then it can come down, it's becoming less again. Look here, that's the biological control agent, and then here you've got the pest population, and you can see it's staying stable, but as soon as the biological control agent becomes more, it becomes less. So when you see concepts like this, you need to think a bit and ask yourself, do I know what are they talking about here? Concepts such as population size, population growth. What do we mean by that? We know what a population is. It's a certain number of individuals of the same species found at the same place at the same time. That's a population. of, let's say, a certain pest, let's say aphids that are sucking dry maybe the roses in a rose bush. So the population is quite high there, and then it comes down. So what do they mean by this biological control agent? Now, maybe you're not too sure. Then go look in the paragraph. Read there, because often the answers are sort of, they give you some hints or tips within the paragraphs they give you. So let's read here. They say, and remember this is part of the question paper number 1 that you will be writing on Friday, environmental studies. Pest control involves the use of pesticides. Now, I find so many learners don't know the meaning of the word pesticide. Remember, a pesticide is only a chemical that destroys pests. You get insecticides killing insects. You get herbicides killing herbs. And you get fungicides killing fungi. So pest control, we normally spray poison, which are chemicals. That's what pesticides are. We spray poison to kill pests. Why? Because the pests compete with us for food, it says even here in the question paper. So pesticides may unfortunately also kill or get into tissue of healthy plants. That's why we don't want to really spray poisons, because we may even kill the good insects like the bees and the butterflies that are pollinators. Now, what could be the result? It says here, now this is part of the question paper. This may reduce crop production, and since pesticides are expensive, increases the cost of food and thus reducing access to poor consumers. Now, another way to control pest populations as a farming practice is to use not pesticides, no poison, but we rather use biological control. Now, what is biological control? It means in the area where the enemy, where the pest stays, you bring the enemy in of that pest to eat up the pest. And this you can clearly see here. As the predator, the hunter of the pest becomes more, the pest is eaten up and it becomes less. So every graph actually tells you a story, and this one tells the story here for us. By the way, we spoke about an example of this pest. We spoke about aphids. If I can just write it for you here. And I said they like to suck plant juices, and they suck a plant dry like a rose bush. Eventually your roses are not pretty at all. So instead of spraying poison, you bring in a predator that catches. You know what a predator is? It's like a hunter. A predator catches a prey. Now, what is a predator for an aphid? It is those that you see in the gardens. You remember some people call them ladybugs or ladybirds. Ladybirds are small, beautiful ones that are so colorful. They are predators on the aphids. So that would be a biological control agent. Do you see how we use the word agent? The one who's doing the job for us. So we release them in the garden, if you could get hold of a lot of them. They use this a lot in agriculture. Of course, us as normal gardeners and so on, we don't really use it at home. But in agriculture, they use a lot of this, where they release the enemy of the pest. The pest is harming us. Look what it says here. And notice what I've done in discussing this question. I'm just using what's in the question paper to unlock for myself a lot of knowledge here. So this knowledge is available for you in the question paper. And that's what's nice about case studies. You've got the paragraph, you learn as much as you can from the paragraph, and you look at the graph. So here it then says there's a biological control agent. So I ask myself, what is that doing? It must be another, it's biological, bio means alive. There must be another insect then catching the pest. So then I ask myself, what really is, if I circle this word here, what really is a pest? A pest is anything that's causing us harm. Whether it's a plant or an animal, it can become a pest. If it says here, if the populations are, the number is above this dotted line, which you see here on the left hand side, is 4,000. If there's 4,000 of them in a certain area, then these insects become a problem for us. They cause us harm. They can even eat our food, compete with us. But I want it below that line, so what do we do as scientists? We bring in the predator, which is a natural enemy. It's a biological control agent. It eats up the pest, and you see how the pest becomes less. Does it make sense to you what you saw here? That when the dotted line goes up, it means our good insect is becoming more. The biological control agent is becoming more because there's so much food for it. And then the enemy becomes less, the pest becomes less. But there comes a point where there's not enough food anymore. Round about here, there's not enough food anymore because the pest is becoming so little in number that the predators also, unfortunately, will have to decrease in number. But that doesn't cause any harm because in nature you would find this naturally. Then later on they can pick up again if the pest would increase somewhere else. So we read the paragraph to get information. Look what they say about the graph. The following graph shows how the population of a pest changed after a biological control agent was introduced to get rid of the pest instead of using pesticides. It says here expensive pesticides. So then questions will follow from the graph and from the paragraph. Questions such as, what is meant by biological control? Now you need to know that from studying, but even if you did not know, you would discern it from here. What is a biological control? What do we mean by that? And that is by using the enemy species of a certain pest, like a predator, to bring it under control. We're not using chemicals, we're not using poison, we're not using what they call pesticides. Explain what is happening with the pest and the control species between 15 and 20 months. So you zoom in then on this time period, you mark it, you can even mark it for yourself on the question paper. Between 15 and 20 months, what is happening? And you can work like this when you write on Friday as well. I need to focus, so I circle this. I need to answer about what's happening with the pest and the biological control species during this time period. Now, any person with eyes will be able to tell you, look here, what's happening with the pest species from there, from 15 to 20. It is decreasing, and it's decreasing rapidly. You can use that word rapidly. It's decreasing rapidly, which means it's decreasing fast. While the control species, during the very same time period, look, it's 15 to 20 there, the control is increasing. So there you've scored another 2 marks. And this is what we would like to see for you learners out there listening today. We want you to score these points. So mention the time and the population size when the pest and the control agent populations reach the same number for the first time. So if you have 2 lines, you always ask yourself, what is the one line? Yes, it's the pest. What's the other line? Oh, it's the other insect. It's the control agent, the biological control agent. When will I know when they are of the same number? I know that most of you know. If you look at the graph, when would I know they are of the same, they have the same population size? It's obviously when they're crossing. When the 2 lines cross, at that point, they say for the first time. Later on they cross again there. But the question is, when do they cross for the first time? So when the lines are together, that's when they have the same number. It's here. You can see the number there. So they say, mention the time and the population size. What do I need to answer? When. So I need to mention the time and also the population size. So the time is here at 15 months, and then I just read across accurately. You use your ruler to look there. The population size will be just under 3,000. You can say 2,900. That will be, so I must answer, always ask yourself, what do they want from me in the question, and concentrate. I must mention it says here, the time that I've done, it's 15 months, and the population size will be 2,900 when the pest and the control agent populations reach the same number, and it must be for the first time. That is the first time. I scored another 2 points, and it is not taken much knowledge nor much intelligence. All of you can do that. And that's why I'm saying if you prepare yourself well, you can do well. Please go study tonight and tomorrow, that you can do very well. Number 4, why would the control system used rather be considered successful and not seen as poor farming practice? Now, when you read through here, you already get some clues that it's already cost effective instead of the poisons. And what harm can this do? It's decreasing the pest population. It's not interfering with any other species. So, and also the third mark here, it naturally then comes down again. The population will not explode. It will not continue. If I continue there, this population will not continue, because that's how it works in nature. If the food is up, then the predator also comes down in number. So you don't have to worry that now later on maybe the ladybirds becomes a pest in causing harm. No, that will not happen, because their food is gone. They will automatically also decrease in number. So this is a typical case study. So you'll get a case study in paper 1 and again in paper 2. You'll get a graph to interpret, and you're going to score marks by concentrating. Remember what I said, look at the heading first. What is this graph all about? Look at the x-axis. Oh, it's over time, it's over years. I see here there's months. And then population. Look at the unit there. And then look at the lines. What is the one showing? What is the other line? What is it doing? Is it going up? Then it's increasing in population size. Going down is decreasing. If it stays the same, then there's nothing happening in the number. So a graph is so easy to understand, and we really hope you do well in this. I've got here some tips for you. Here it is, how to answer case studies. Look at your screen there. The first one says, look at the heading. You read the heading first. And the pictures to get an idea of what the case study is about. In this case, it was not a picture, it was a graph I showed you. So please remember, talking about the heading, for any diagram you're going to draw, for any table you're going to draw, for any graph you're going to draw, anything you're going to do, remember always to give it a heading. You're scoring marks for that caption or that heading. Always remember, it's unnecessary to lose marks for that. The second bullet says, read through the case study carefully and slowly and understand what they're trying to tell you there, which is normally, and these things will not be difficult. It's always written in such a way that you can understand it. The third one, read each question and underline the key word. So you need to look for certain key words in the paragraph. You have your pen with you in exams, and you circle the key words that are most important, and look for verbs, look for action words. What is explained here in these concepts, what's happening. Read the case study again and underline each of the key words in the case study. Now answer the questions. Pay special attention to action verbs. Look at the mark allocation as a guide of how many facts should be included in your answer. As you saw in this question paper I've got here, look at this last question. Why would the control system used rather be considered successful and not seen as poor farming practice? Now it's 3 marks. Now you realize you have to write a bit more. See if you can write as much as possible to cover this topic. Think a bit about it, that you can write 3 points. Remember, for markers, they're looking normally for the first 3 facts. So you can't write a lot of facts. Your best answer must be first, so that we can tick it off at the beginning. Like this definition here, what is meant by biological control in general? In this case, this question paper required of you to only write it's only 1 mark. That obviously then means you did not have to write a long paragraph, just get to the point here. And then always, like I said, and we also said earlier, you look for keywords. So let's just go through this again. What would be the keywords in this whole discussion here? First of all, this is all about what? This is all about pest control. So I can circle that. It involves pesticides. Yes, this is a problem, to kill pests that compete with humans for food. Pesticides may kill or get into the tissue of healthy animals. So here we see there's a problem that we can underline. This is the problem with pesticides. So what I'm doing, I'm getting information from the paragraph given, which I can use in my answer. This may also reduce, remember we're looking for verbs. It reduces the crop production. Since pesticides, what's the problem with it? Pesticides are expensive. They increase the cost of food and it affects the poor. So one way to control pest populations other than pesticides is biological control. So we're playing off here biological control in comparison to pesticides. The following graph shows the population of pests changed after a biological control agent was introduced to get rid of the pest instead of using expensive pesticides. Now I want to ask you a question. What is the value of this paragraph here? Why should one really read carefully and focus on that paragraph? Because it explains, look there, it explains the graph for you. You have the graph, but it helps you to understand the graph. It says the following graph shows how the population of a pest changed after this species was brought in and what it did to the pest. So do you see you can do well in this? So that is all I'm going to say about case studies. You are going to see them, and I'm wishing you all of the best with case studies. I'm sure you are going to do well. Now we still have about 15 minutes left before we move on to our break. We're going to have 15 minutes and then we're going to have a 10-minute break. But for the next 15 minutes, I've been asked to discuss something many learners still battle with. And I'm sure you'll be glad to hear. I'll be discussing a topic which is part of paper 1. And let me tell you, it is a favorite normally of examiners. You know what I'm going to write here. You can see what I'm writing. Negative feedback. They love to ask it normally as a question counting 6 marks. So here's another 6 marks that you would like to score. You would like to get 6 out of 6 for it. And they love asking certain hormones that work together or work against one another. Let me use one example. TSH. And remember, it stimulates the release of thyroxine. I'm making an arrow because it stimulates, TSH is a certain hormone that stimulates the release of thyroxine. Now, when we talk about hormones, there are a few concepts I would like you to understand before we are going to go into a discussion of negative feedback. I'm going to write them down here. You can also write them down for yourself and ask yourself, do you know the meaning of the word? What really is a hormone? Because when we talk about negative feedback, we are busy discussing hormones. Do you understand the word stimulate? Because that's what hormones do. Do you understand the opposite of the word stimulate? I'm going to write here, or its opposite. What's the opposite of stimulate? In hormones? Inhibit. Some hormones stimulate, other hormones inhibit. We will come back to that. Do you understand that? Also, do you know the effects of an oversecretion? So let's say there's a word hypersecretion. There's also the opposite of that, and that is a hyposecretion. So it could happen in somebody's body that they have an oversecretion. Over, hyper, a shop like a hypermarket is, hyper means very big. That's an oversecretion. So if you have too much or too great concentration of hormone in the blood, it can cause great trouble. Hypo, on the other hand, means there's not enough of it is released. So let's talk about this now, coming back to hormones. Hormones stimulate organs in your body to do their job. Remember, we said hormones are chemical messengers. That's what they are. They are released by glands in the blood. Let me draw a gland here. These glands that release the hormones are all called endocrine glands. The Americans say endocrine. Endocrine glands. Why are they called endocrine? Because if the blood flows here, there's no little tube through which the hormone is. And please, when we speak about hormones, we always say they are secreted, not excreted. Excreted means it leaves the body. Secreted means it stays in the body. So hormones are secreted. So there, I'm going to draw it like into the blood. There's the blood flowing. So there's the hormone. It is secreted into the blood, and there it goes as a messenger to go and give its message. Now it's traveling, this hormone is traveling, there it goes. And here you find a big organ, let's say the liver. I'm just using the liver as an example. So the blood goes through the liver. When it gets to the liver, the hormone gives a message to the liver to do something. The hormone does not do the job. Let me use an example of a certain hormone. You've heard of this hormone and you know what it does. The hormone is called insulin. There, insulin. Insulin travels in the blood. Now, you know ultimately what will be the effect if insulin is secreted. It will cause the glucose levels in the blood to be lower. Now, do you know how some learners write it? Let me write it for you, and I'm going to tell you that if a certain learner writes it like this, it's wrong. What they say, what some learners like to write, they say the function of insulin. Glucose is lowered in the blood by insulin. Now, actually, the insulin, this learner makes it sound like the insulin absorbs the glucose or something like that. No, this is not completely true. What insulin does, here's the better answer. Insulin stimulates a series of reactions to happen. For instance, stimulates the liver to store glucose in the form of stored glucose is called glycogen. So this is better. Insulin stimulates the liver. So do you see what hormones do? They just give the message for something to happen. And once again, I use that word, hormones, they stimulate. Now, stimulate, if you look in the dictionary, it means it causes something to happen. It doesn't do the job itself. It just gives the message that it must happen. Like you got a message that today at 3 o'clock there will be a certain lesson on life sciences. The person who gave you the message, is that person necessarily part of your lesson sitting there with you? No. Maybe it was the principal who told you, be there for the lesson. He was the messenger. And then you went, and that's why you're now there. So that's what hormones do in the body. They cause something to happen. They stimulate something to happen. But they don't do the job themselves. Please remember what we say about hormones. They are messengers. And they are chemical messengers. And can one of you remember what kind of chemicals are hormones? They are proteins. Hormones are mostly proteins. Take note of that. And I hope you're sitting there with a piece of paper and a pen taking notes. Hormones, if they ask you, they travel in the blood. They are secreted by endocrine glands. Exocrine is something different. The opposite of endocrine is exocrine. If I just draw it here, if there's a little tube through which a secretion goes, like here's a little, we call it a little duct, a little tube through which it runs, then it's not endocrine, but rather exocrine, or some teachers say exocrine gland that makes secretions. Like the glands that produce saliva in your mouth, they are exocrine because it's a little duct through which the saliva runs from the glands into your mouth, a little canal, as you can see here. But the hormones, they all come from the ductless glands. So now I've told you a lot about hormones. Let me just summarize again what I told you about hormones. You know this, but just take note. They are chemical messengers. They stimulate certain reactions to happen, although they don't cause it. They stimulate reactions to happen. They all come from the ductless glands, which we call the endocrine glands. They are all secreted, that's the word we use. They secreted into the blood. They travel in the blood where they will have their effect. They will give the message to a certain target organ. In this case, I use the example of the liver. So most hormones, they stimulate something to happen. But the opposite of that is inhibit. Some hormones don't cause something to happen. They are like putting the brakes on. Some hormones say, stop, don't do this, it's going too far. We must do something about this. They put the brakes on. And that is the opposite of stimulate. Some of these hormones are, in proper English we say, inhibitory hormones. They inhibit something to happen. So when we discuss negative feedback, we need to understand how hormones work. Now, you know what hormones now are, and let's now move on to this topic of negative feedback. When we talk about that, I just want to make a new heading here because I'm expecting to see this in some way, although I've not seen the paper for Friday. Definitely we may not see it, but it's a favorite question. Negative feedback, please go and study it in paragraph form, that you must be able to discuss it. Now, here's another very important tip I need to tell you, and for the senior markers and the chief markers will tell you, and your teacher should have told you as well. If they say describe or discuss, please write down. If they say discuss in the paper, you must write in words, in paragraphs. It's only when they say draw a diagram, then you must now draw a flow chart or something like that according to what they ask you. But if they say discuss and you draw a flow chart or a diagram, you may lose all those points. But they can also, in the question paper, give you diagrams or negative feedback. But if you understand the concept, you will be able to answer any diagram that you've never seen in your life about negative feedback. But you need to understand it. Now, before we come into the real discussion of negative feedback, let's just have a bit of background on what happens here in your brain. I'm going to draw here the lower part of the brain. There you can see it. Remember, it's got all those folds and grooves. And then there in the brain, there's a certain area here at the lower part. And then there's a little gland that sits just above your mouth. There's a gland that sits there. It's got like a little stalk there. It's actually got two parts in it, a front part and a back part, but that doesn't really matter now. Let's just color it in. It's a gland that sits there. Now, can you label this? You need to be able to know what is this called here at the top. Remember, this is now the lower part. Here's the brain. And what do you call that? Remember, that part is called the hypothalamus. And then this gland, which actually stands under the control of the hypothalamus. Take note what I'm saying. This gland here just above your mouth, it works under the control of this part of the brain called the hypothalamus. So this is called, look how I'm writing it. If you write it, it sounds like hypophysis. It's easy to remember, hypothalamus, then under it's the hypophysis. But you pronounce it hypophysis if you want to say it correctly in English. Do you know the other name for it? I'm sure you know the other name. Pituitary gland. Some books also call it, or some people, I'm going to write the common name here, they call it the master gland. The master gland. Why the master gland? Because it's the boss of all the glands. It releases about 10 different hormones. And I just want to emphasize the one for now, because we're going to use this one as an example afterwards. That's the one I wrote earlier on my paper when I said we're going to talk about TSH and thyroxine and their interaction and how negative feedback happens there. So this master gland, the boss of all glands that sits here just above your mouth, which is called the pituitary gland or the hypophysis, it releases many hormones. Growth hormone is one of them. If you secrete too much of it, you will be a giant, you will be too big. Now I know really some of you are pointing at one another, laughing at one another because one guy is big. Don't worry, he's just grown well. He doesn't suffer from an over-secretion of growth hormone, no. Don't make a joke of him. Some people have an under-secretion of growth hormone, I'm writing here GH, under-secretion. Then they don't grow at all, they stay small. Once again, don't laugh at anybody, please, don't point fingers. So there's about 10 hormones that are secreted here from the hypophysis. And these all travel in the blood and they go and they play their role to the certain target organs. Talking about target organs, what will be the target organ for growth hormone? Who can say? It will be the bones and the muscles. They are the target organs because they must increase in size, and that's how you get taller. But I'm not going to talk about the growth hormone now. I want to focus on this one called TSH. You know what it stands for? Can you say it there together as a group? T stands for? S? H. Yes? You got it right? Thyroid stimulating hormone. It travels in the blood. There, I'm making it red because it travels in the blood. Here it goes. Where does it go to? The thyroid stimulating hormone is a chemical, it's a hormone traveling in the blood, and it goes here to the throat. Now, in your throat, you can all feel your throat. Please touch here and you will feel cartilage rings like this. Cartilage rings. There you see in your so-called trachea, your windpipe. Now, surrounding your trachea, there's a big gland that sits around the trachea. And I'm telling you, if you've got problems with this gland, you'll be a very sickly person. What is the name of that gland? The thyroid gland I told you earlier. Let me just label it here. The thyroid gland. Now, the thyroid gland secretes, on its turn, another hormone called thyroxine. If you have an over-secretion, if your thyroid gland is too busy and it produces too much thyroxine, then you will have a serious problem with your metabolism. You will basically produce too much energy and you'll have many side effects to it. If you produce too little thyroxine, once again, so many side effects. You'll even feel cold, you'll put on weight, you won't eat much, but you'll put on weight. And so many other, you will have no energy. So the thyroid gland is very important in controlling your metabolism. That means how fast is everything happening inside your body. So do you see what's happening here? The hypophysis secretes this hormone amongst many others because it's the boss gland, it's the master gland. One of them is thyroid stimulating hormone. It travels in the blood, it gets here to the thyroid, and it stimulates the thyroid to release more thyroxine. So the more TSH you and I secrete from here, the more thyroxine will be secreted from the thyroid. It's a chain reaction. Do you see that? Now we're going to have a break now of 10 minutes, and then when you come back, then we will get into this negative feedback, because you see what I've done here. I've just written positives. If the one gets more, the other one gets more. So where does the negative come in? Please be back in 10 minutes. Quickly go outside and be back in 10 minutes. See you just now. So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your break. I certainly enjoyed mine. We're now looking at what we said, negative feedback. And here I want you to concentrate, because I'm going to explain the concept to you. You are going to understand it, but then I want you to write a definition, because that's how you're going to start your answer. The question can be, I'm giving you a typical question. Please write down the question. It can be a typical question. Describe negative feedback by referring to TSH. Let me say it again. Describe negative feedback by referring to TSH and thyroxine as an example. Did you write down the question? Describe negative feedback by referring to TSH and thyroxine as an example. Now, the way to start off that question, please write down how you're going to start it off. You write a definition of negative feedback, an explanation of what is negative feedback in general. But I'm not going to give you that answer now. I'm going to explain negative feedback by means of this example, and while I'm doing it, you get your words ready to say, but what is negative feedback? How would you describe it? I'm going to do this example, and then I'm going to refer to another example, and then see if you can write a definition of negative feedback at the end of the second one. You don't have to write it in between. Listen to my examples, and I'll give you a minute or two after the second example, then you can write your definition. Let me just interrupt myself. We'll be doing negative feedback now because I was asked to do it. It's also a favorite topic of mine. But a question came through on environmental studies. The question is all about how poor farming practices contribute to reduced land, and also the role of alien vegetation. Now, we will touch on that towards the end of the discussion. So for that learner from Kroonstad who asked that question, we will come back to that, but towards the end of this discussion. Let's first do the work that we were supposed to do today, and that is negative feedback, but I'm going to try and make time for you there. So let's just look at this again. The master gland, the boss of all glands, the hypophysis, it releases or secretes quite a number of hormones, perhaps 10 of them. There's growth hormone, there's prolactin, there's LH, there's FSH, and so on. But here we're talking about the one, thyroid stimulating hormone. So it travels in the blood, and then it goes to the thyroid gland, and it stimulates, that's the word, it stimulates the thyroid gland to again make its secretion. So in answering that question, you will say, when the hypothalamus in the brain, now you can just write down there for yourself, you will write down the hypothalamus detects, when the blood travels through, here the blood comes and it travels through the brain and it travels through the hypothalamus. There are, let me write the word here, chemoreceptors. There are chemoreceptors in the hypothalamus that detect that there is an undersecretion, please write down there, an undersecretion of thyroxine in the blood. What does that mean? It means there's not enough. That means a low concentration. Remember, in science we use square brackets for concentration. There's a low concentration of thyroxine in the blood. Now, for any negative feedback system, you first need a control center to pick up the problem. So who picks up the problem? That is one of the functions of the hypothalamus. It's got chemoreceptors. Receptor means it receives. Chemo means it receives, it checks out the chemicals there, chemo. So it checks out the concentration of thyroxine here in the brain. So I'm just going to write here for you again to see. Thyroxine. It travels in the blood, but when it comes here through the hypothalamus has got these chemoreceptors to detect, but there's not enough thyroxine. So what must happen? Then the hypothalamus will stimulate, I'm going to write the word here, stimulate the hypophysis to release more TSH. And if there's more TSH, it's thyroid stimulating hormone, then more thyroxine will be produced by the thyroid, because the thyroid stimulating hormone is stimulated to produce more thyroxine. Do you see it is a chain reaction? But now we come to negative feedback. Now for the first time we come to negative feedback. Negative feedback means if there's more and more and more thyroxine being produced. I told you that if you have an oversecretion of thyroxine, there's trouble for you. You'll start sweating. You will have, some children will be hyperactive. They'll get naughty in primary school. They'll constantly be in accidents. Apart from that, you will be skinny. Even though you eat a lot, you will be skinny. A lot of trouble for you. Your heart will beat too fast. You will be even suffering from anxiety. You will be anxious. So if you have too much thyroxine over a long period of time, that is a big problem. So now, initially, we had too little thyroxine, so the body corrected it by what I showed you. The hypothalamus detected the problem, fixed it by releasing more TSH, and then more thyroxine was produced. But we get to a point where there's too much thyroxine. How do we say it in proper scientific language? Too much thyroxine in the blood? Can you say to your friend? We don't say too much. We say there is a too high concentration of thyroxine in the blood. Then you can say there's actually a hyper secretion. It means too much. That's what it means in normal language. So now the blood travels from here. There the blood goes, and it goes, yes, once again it travels, the heart is pumping, and it goes there through the brain, and it reaches the hypothalamus again. What do these very same chemoreceptors now detect? They detect, but there is a too high concentration of thyroxine in this blood. So now less, look, here comes a negative in, less TSH will be secreted, so that less thyroxine will be secreted, so that it can be balanced out, that you come back to normal again. So do you see what has happened? Because the second hormone in the row has been too high, too much of it, too high concentration, it actually now not stimulated. I'm going to write the word here now. Let me write it in another color for you. I'm going to write it here in black, because black is a negative color for in writing in art and so on. So it now inhibits the hypophysis here, so that it does now not release the normal amount of TSH, but actually less. And that's why we say it is negative feedback, because of the second hormone causing that the first one is inhibited. Are you with me there? The second one is causing the first one to be inhibited. And if there's less of that one, then there's also less of the next one. Let me use another example. If you, for instance, look at, let's just draw this again. Here's the bottom of the brain. Here's this area. Can you remember what is it called? Hypo what? Hypothalamus. The hypothalamus controls this gland, which is the master gland. You know what it's called now. The hypophysis, the master gland. There it is. Sits just above your mouth. So let me write here. It is the hypophysis. Now we spoke about TSH, but there's also other hormones that are being secreted from here. The one I'm going to emphasize now that's being secreted is that female hormone called follicle stimulating hormone. It travels in the blood, and where does it go? Can you remember? Where does it go in the body? It goes all the way to the ovaries of a woman. Now the ovaries in women you've got two, just above your belt, one on the right hand side and one on the left hand side. They're quite big organs. So you've got here, I'm drawing one ovary here. Now remember, every month there are about 250,000 of these cells in here. Who of you can remember, what do we call these cells that are, even before birth, they were forming in the little girl, they were there? Can you remember? We call them follicle cells, follicles, or follicle cells. So that's why we call this hormone follicle stimulating hormone, so that one of them will go into development every month. Just one of them will go through a primary follicle, then it will become a secondary follicle, just like primary school, secondary school. Then it becomes a tertiary follicle, a big one here. And inside it, there is the egg cell inside the ovary. That egg cell that's being released on day 14 of the cycle, that egg cell is called an ovum. An ovum. So that ovum, once it has been released from this structure, remember we said this follicle in the beginning is a primary follicle, then it changes, like going from primary school you go to secondary school, secondary follicle, then it changes, become a tertiary follicle, like when you go to tertiary institution. But do you remember the other name for a tertiary follicle? It's also called a Graafian follicle. The Graafian follicle then releases the egg cell. Remember, I can say the ovary is the big organ releasing the ovum. Please do not mix up these words. The ovary is big. In real life, it is probably a bit bigger than this structure I've got here. I'm just using this highlighter's tip here. It's about that size, the ovary. It's a big structure, while the ovum, you need a microscope to see it. So please don't mix up these words in the exams. The ovary releases the ovum. Who of you know the plural of ovary? It's ovaries. And the plural of ovum is ova, OVA. You must pray that you never secrete two or produce two ova, because you're going to have twins. Some people say you're blessed, but I can promise you, you are not going to sleep if you have twins. So that is because you have released two ova. But there's one ovum per month that's been released here. This is all under the control of this hormone, follicle stimulating hormone. It has stimulated, which means caused, one of these follicles to go into development per month, to form all of that, so that one is released. One ovum is released. Then that one can be fertilized and you can have a baby. But after day 14, the remainder of this Graafian follicle, after day 14, what is left? Can you remember, you've studied by now, what do you call the remainder of this if it continues to develop? Now it forms there. Actually, I should have drawn it in yellow. And I forgot I had here a yellow highlighter. I should draw it in yellow because it's actually called the yellow body. What's the proper name for the yellow body? Yes, you are right if you say it is this yellow body is called, body in Latin is corpus, and yellow is luteum. The corpus luteum. Now the corpus luteum on its turn secretes a certain hormone that's very important in the female system. That hormone that comes here from the corpus luteum is called, it goes in the blood, and it's called, you see what I've written here? Progesterone. What does progesterone do? If I just have another page, I'll show you quickly, I'll show you here. If you have the uterus, this is the house of the unborn baby. Remember, every month there's a lining that forms inside this house of the unborn baby. This house is called the uterus. The uterus. There's a lining that forms. It's very rich in blood inside. Now, if the egg cell has been fertilized, then the embryo will be implanted. And here is the embryo. being implanted in that layer called the endometrium. Endometrium. So, what's the role of progesterone? The one I had here. Progesterone causes, it gives instruction, because that's what hormones do. They just gives the message for this endometrium to stay in place. That's why at day, if you have the female cycle, remember day 1 is when menstruation starts. Now what is menstruation? Menstruation is when this lining comes off, when this endometrium comes off. That is menstruation. It comes out. That is menstruation. Now when that starts, that's called day 1. Then it can last maybe for a 4-day period, or maybe 5 days, or maybe slightly longer. But here by day 14, that would be the time when ovulation would happen, which we described here. Ovulation is day 14, the release of the ovum. Now, once that has happened, only after that, this hormone is secreted, progesterone. So now, from day 14 to day 25, the progesterone is high in the blood. I'm going to write here for you, from day 14 to day 25, progesterone concentration is, there's a high concentration of progesterone from day 14 to day 25. When, and I want to ask you this question, in this cycle, when did the follicle develop? Was it not from day 1 to day 14? The formation of, from the primary follicle, secondary follicle, this whole process, it started at day 1 of the cycle and it happened up to day 14. It ended at day 14. Now the job was done of the follicle stimulating hormone. It should not continue for the next 2 weeks until the next cycle. Remember, it's a 28-day cycle. So it should stop. Once the job has been done, FSH must be stopped. It can't continue more egg cells. Can you think what will be the result if an egg cell is released at day 14 and FSH would just continue to be secreted, more and more of it being secreted here from the hypophysis? If that would be the case, then a woman could fall pregnant like here, and suddenly there would be more egg cells forming constantly here. And after 10 days after this, you'll fall pregnant with another baby. So you'll give birth, and 10 days later you'll give birth to another baby. This may not happen. And you've been designed like that for it not to happen. How have you been created like this? It works like this. When progesterone is secreted here at day 14, and progesterone is high in concentration, that means there is now a lot because the corpus luteum is secreting it. Then progesterone has got this thing, and I'm going to write it here for you in red, that you see it very clearly. Progesterone inhibits FSH. So as it goes around in the body, and the progesterone, which is high in concentration, goes through the brain, and the hypothalamus here with its chemoreceptors detect that the progesterone is high, it will inhibit FSH, because while the progesterone is high, it will give the message to say, FSH, go into resting. We don't want you now in the blood, because what you do, you cause more and more egg cells to be produced. So do you see, the second one inhibits the first one. Is it not the same as what we saw earlier? When the second hormone is high, it inhibits the first one. So this is what negative feedback is. There's always an inhibiting of the other one. So can you now write a definition of negative feedback? Let's. I want you to quickly take a piece of paper and see, and I trust that you can, by now, you will be able to write a definition of negative feedback. While you're going to write it, I'm also going to write here a definition, but I trust that yours will be correct. Negative feedback What is it? Don't look at what I'm going to write. I'm going to actually take it away from the screen. Negative feedback. And then I'm going to write here a definition of it. What is negative feedback? And I'm going to use the word homeostasis. Homeostasis, remember, refers to when things are kept constant in the body. Different aspects of the body, like let's say oxygen or water or salts or even your metabolism. When that is kept constant, that is homeostasis. So I'm going to refer to negative feedback refers to the role of hormones. Let me, I want you to think about it, what I said about the second hormone and the first hormone, and then in keeping everything constant. Quickly write there. I'm going to be quiet for 2 minutes. You write it down for yourself. They put your words together. You can help one another. You must write there about the role of the second hormone on the first hormone. Right, I'm ready with my definition. If you're not done yet, look if you've got something similar and you'll see now how simple it is. What is negative feedback? Negative feedback refers to the inhibiting of a certain hormone by another hormone when that hormone is in high concentration. Example, when thyroxine has a high concentration, it inhibits the first one that originally stimulated it, thyroid stimulating hormone. So normally thyroid stimulating hormone would cause more thyroxine. So if I can just draw it in a diagram again for you, you'll probably see it in a diagram if you would get it in this specific example. They can draw it like this. They will draw a line and they can say, if you get more of this, then what would be the effect of thyroxine? Then it also becomes more, and then when it goes back, it causes less. Look there. TSH causes more thyroxine to be secreted, therefore less TSH will ultimately be secreted. So what has happened here? What word should I write here? What has thyroxine, an oversecretion of it, done to TSH? What should I write here? It inhibits TSH. Therefore now less thyroxine will also be secreted because less. It's negative feedback. Please go and prepare an answer for yourself for Friday about negative feedback by writing the definition first. When they say the question, describe negative feedback by using TSH and thyroxine as an example, then you start off by the definition. If you're not comfortable with the one I've given, you can also use one in your book, or together with your teacher put together, or with your friends, a nice definition that will give you about 2 marks. And then you start describing, if you have too little thyroxine in the blood, then more TSH is secreted so that you have more thyroxine, up to the point where you have too much of it, then the second hormone will inhibit the first one, which is TSH. And you can give the detail about the hypothalamus with the chemoreceptors picking up the problem, detecting the problem first of all, so that you will then ultimately produce less thyroxine. So don't think it's difficult. It's very, very simple. Go practice it if you want to score between 6 and 8 marks. Also, you will be able on Friday to identify a diagram like this and fill in the missing answers, whatever they ask you to do. So they can ask you any example, but it's always when hormones work together in pairs. Can you think of another example? Can you think of another one inhibiting two that work together for the same aspect of homeostasis? Can you think of, let's say, sugar balances? There we've got the 2 hormones. Let me just refer to them briefly. this is another example that you can get, because the question that you can get on Friday can deal with any two hormones that fulfill a certain aspect of homeostasis. Can you think of, let's refer to the glucose levels in your blood, glucose concentration. What controls it? There are two hormones that control it. The one is called insulin. And what does insulin do to the glucose concentration in the blood? It lowers it, that it's not too high. For instance, if your glucose concentration is 130 milligrams per 100 mLs of blood, it must come down to the normal. It can't stay there. You'll be very, very sick. You'll go blind, your wounds won't heal, you may get gangrene. It's very serious if it stays up there. It must come back to normal, the glucose concentration in your blood. Look, I've written in red to remind you of blood. It must come down to normal. So that's 100 milligram is normal. But who's the messenger to say it must come down? It is insulin. It lowers the glucose level. But then there's the other one that works opposite to it. And what is the opposite? To raise the blood glucose levels in the blood is the opposite hormone. We spoke about it earlier today. Glucagon. It's the opposite. These two work opposite of one another. That means, let me ask you this question. If glucagon concentration in the blood is high, what do you think will it do to the insulin? The insulin then will be low, because the two work opposite of one another. On the other hand, if the insulin levels are high, the glucagon will be low. The two work opposites of one another. Let me just use a word that you saw earlier today. What did we say? You must never, please, when you write on Friday, do not mix up these questions. We don't want to see any of you mixing up these two words. Glucagon, here's the one word, and glycogen is the other word. Do not mix them up. What is glucagon? It's the opposite of insulin. Look at the blue there, the blue. It's causing glucose in the blood to be higher. That is glucagon. But what is glycogen? Glycogen, please write down for yourself with a Y. Don't mix up these words. You're going to lose marks. Glycogen is simply equal to, glycogen is stored glucose. And by the way, it is stored in the liver. Insulin and glucose, remember, insulin and glucagon, remember, are released by cells in the pancreas. Remember, there's beta cells that secrete insulin, and there are alpha cells that secrete glucagon from the pancreas. So they give the message to the blood. Should the glucose go up, glucagon is the messenger, and when it's high, it works negatively on insulin. It's got a negative impact there. And insulin, when it's high, glucagon must be low. So the two work opposites. So they can use any of these examples. Doesn't matter. I'm confident that you will be able to answer this. You start off with a definition of negative feedback, and then you explain when the one is high, it causes the other one to be low. Just remember the difference between glucagon and glycogen. Glucagon is the opposite of insulin in what it does. And glycogen is simply glucose. When it is stored in the liver, we call it glycogen. Take note of that. So thank you for your attention. We still have 10 minutes. That's all we have time for. Then you must go and study. But I just want to come back to that one question we received from the learner from Kroonstad about what happens to the negative impact. We're going quickly to environmental studies. Remember, that's grade 11 work. But the learner wanted to know, what can we say about poor farming practices? So quickly, while you're sitting there, let's also now benefit from this question this learner asked. And poor farming practices, she wanted to know, in like a long question. What can we write about how it impacts on agricultural land? And then she also said alien vegetation also is a problem. So let's just write down a few things here. What will we be looking for when we look at poor farming practices? Can you think of one? Overgrazing. You know what it is. I'm just going to write down key words here. Overgrazing. You know what overgrazing is? It means you put too many cattle or sheep in a small space and they destroy the grass there, and eventually there's no more vegetation. So what it will lead to, overgrazing will lead to, and I want you to always use this word, overexploitation. Exploit. To exploit in English means to use something up to the point where you use too much of it. That's overexploitation. So what you would have is the species you will be destroying, and some species could even become endangered or totally extinct. So from that area you're busy destroying the plants totally, because the animals get so hungry because you put too many animals by overgrazing on a small piece of land. Eventually they even dig up the roots and they pull out the roots as well. So you destroy even some of those species. And what you affect in the process, you can even affect the food chains there, because now some of those insects that have been eating on those grass species and so on, they die. The birds that were catching the insects, they have to migrate, and you're messing up the whole ecosystem. So the food chains are affected by it. But what do you do to the agricultural land? Now there's no plants, so there's the vegetation cannot, with their roots, hold the soil. So what happens? You get soil erosion. How do you get soil erosion? You can mention two things. Either by water, when it rains, it washes away the sand into the river, and also by the wind. It blows away the sand. You've seen in the Free State how sometimes these dust storms, the sky is red in color. It's the soil being blown away. And with it, especially in our province, we often see, and you can please use this, monoculture. This is not good when it comes to poor farming practices, where you just have one piece of land and you plant in rows, you destroy all the vegetation there, and you just plant in rows, let's say mealies. That causes trouble, because what happens there, that whole area, the ecosystem is destroyed. Ecosystem is destroyed there. You also break up food chains because you just plant one type of thing there. That's monoculture. Now with that monoculture, mono means one, and a culture comes from agriculture. You have just one crop that you're planting there, like let's say mealies. Now for any farmer that's planting mealies, it can be millions of rands. And you see it now in the area where you're staying. The farmers are busy planting their mealies. So they put in millions of rand to invest in that crop, the crop referring to the mealies or the wheat that they're planting. Then in order to protect that, they must spray poisons. Do you remember the word for poisons? We said they must spray pesticides. So with that, they destroy the pests, but they also kill beneficial insects. Beneficial insects like pollinators, like bees and so on. With the pesticides, remember pesticides are poisons. They also kill the good insects. And they even kill the bacteria in the soil that we need. They also kill other plants by spraying these poisons. But we have to do it, unfortunately, because we want to eat. So we look after our mealies because we need it for food and to feed our animals and so on. Also for the mealies to grow well, unfortunately, we're bringing in more and more poor farming practices. We're bringing in, let's say, fertilizers. Now you know what fertilizers are. Fertilizers are, you buy them in bags, these chemicals like granules, and then you spray them there, you put them on the ground. When it rains, the chemicals go into the water. Now these especially contain nitrates, NO3, nitrates, also phosphates, and some other chemicals, which the plants need so the mealies can grow well. But there's a problem with that. Not only do you change the pH of the soil, there's not only that, when it rains, this washes away into the river. Here's the river flowing, and all of these wash into the rivers, and then you have that process. Please write down eutrophication. So now we have eutrophication in the river because I'm enriching the river ecosystem with my fertilizers that I've thrown. Of course, if they ask you what would be an alternative, because we need to throw fertilizer in the soil, we need to add it so that our mealies grow better. So what would be an alternative? If we don't do this, we can rather use what they call organic fertilizer, which means you use chicken manure or cow manure or something. You don't buy these bags which have been made in the factory. You rather use organic stuff that you have already there around your house, like chicken manure and so on. But with these that we buy in town, we put them in the land, and eventually we enrich the water with the nitrates and the phosphates. And then who grows nicely on this? Algae. And when the algae become more, they actually, when they die, they take oxygen out of the water. And who dies because they don't have any oxygen? The fish. Because the algae, when they die, in the decomposing process, have taken out all the oxygen. So these are some of the poor farming practices that we see. Especially if you discuss these are the most important ones. With it, you ask the question about alien vegetation. Now, many people plant. What do we mean by alien vegetation? It's also, you can say it's part of poor farming practices, but even in town, we plant a lot of alien plants. That means plants that potentially can become a pest in the fact that they've been brought from overseas. They've never been indigenous. They were never here. So we brought them over because they're beautiful. So they grow here and they become a pest in our country. Do you know why they become a pest, these alien plants? Because when we brought them over, somebody maybe went to America to get it there and they brought it here. They did not bring the insect that was eating it with it. So now it becomes more and more in our country because our plants have their own pests, but these alien plants don't have their pests that are eating them. So the alien vegetation take over. How? They take the space. They use a lot of water, a great amount of water. Alien vegetation, more. They use more water than our plants, the alien plants. They take our space of our plants. They compete with our plants. They become a pest, even in agriculture. Eventually, the farmer has to chop them out or make a plan with them because they take over the land. That is the problem with alien vegetation. So there's a few other things that you can go and look up for an answer with poor farming practices and also alien vegetation. Go look at your notes for more answers. My time is up. It was great to be with you. I hope I will see you at a tertiary institution like University of the Free State next year. But I'm sure I will not see you again in matric anyway. Thank you very much for your time.